Thank you very much, everybody. Good morning, and thank you very much, Mike. Mike has been passionate about the care that this country provides for its armed forces veterans for many years. Mike has been out on the ground, as you've seen in the film, with them, and he has shared their discomfort, and he's shared their sorrow and their pain. So, Mike, thank you very much, and I certainly look forward to giving you a prominent role in looking after our veterans in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, homeless veterans are a massive issue, but let me just go through a couple of facts. Of course, it's just been covered. Charities estimate that there are some 7,000 homeless veterans on Britain's streets. Another fact, in the year 2016-17, some 6,500 homes were given to asylum seekers. Fact, at the beginning of November this year, this month, the Home Office proposed moving extremists to the top of council housing waiting lists, helping them into education, training and employment, and referring them to the NHS for mental health treatment. Given the situation facing our veterans, such a situation is outrageous and absolutely shows total disregard for what our veterans have been through for this country. And you know what? The reason given for that is that jihadis returning from fighting with groups like Islamic State are not prosecutable because there is insufficient evidence against them. Well, you know what? Change the law. The Treason Act should be taken out of the Public Order Act and made fit for purpose against any returning jihadi fighters who possess a British passport. They are traitors if they have been fighting for or supporting the enemies of this country. And the idea that they should be given housing preference over our veterans appalls me. The human cost of serving our armed forces is clearly not only paid in blood and pain and anguish on the battlefield, it goes well beyond. Think for a moment. 7,000 homeless ex-servicemen equates to just under 1 in 10 of the entire strength of the present British Army. Now, of course, I understand that they're not all former soldiers. Many are former airmen, sailors and marines. But that figure of 1 in 10 gives some idea of the scale of the problem. And it's not just the individuals who are affected by this. It's the broken marriages and the anguish that comes. And when one sees that homelessness is generally caused by unemployment, we can understand that the problem becomes a much broader one. Particularly in a country that through its education policies has created a two-tier workforce, those with degrees and those without. Those without are increasingly seen as second-class citizens in the workplace. Approximately 3.2% of our armed forces personnel suffer from mental health-related issues. There are no accurate figures for those veterans who have left the forces. The rates in the Army are higher than those in the Marines, which has a higher rate of combat readiness and preparedness because of the additional proportion of budget spent on their training. The rate of mental health care issues within the armed forces has doubled since 2007, when selection procedures in recruitment were more rigid and more training was given before cuts to training. This indicates that the more training that's provided, the better prepared the individual is to deal with the general mental stresses of military life. This also suggests, therefore, that the MOD's cost-saving cutbacks in training are having a direct impact on the welfare and safety of our servicemen and women, as well as more obviously compromising combat effectiveness. As Mike has just stated, UKIP is clear on the urgent need for a Veterans Department, headed by a minister. In addition, unlike the Conservative government, UKIP will honour the military covenant. But let's talk about armed forces recruitment for a moment. Recruitment is a significant challenge, but it is easily solved. All three services are failing to hit their recruitment targets by around 10%. The MOD gives many reasons for this, for example, pay and conditions, a lower level of physical fitness and grit compared to previous generations amongst our young people. And whilst these are indeed issues, the biggest problem is the outsourcing of armed forces recruitment to private companies. This outsourcing has significantly harmed forces recruitment. Whereas 20 years ago, you could easily get into the military within 3 or 4 months of expressing an interest to do so, it can now take over a year. And when you are only 20 years old, a year is a long time. You might have not enjoyed your work or not had a job. You may have been single without a girlfriend or boyfriend, and you thought, actually, the armed forces are a good option. But in 3, 4, 5, 6 months, a year, at that age, your life has moved on very quickly, and you've lost interest. This is the problem. It's taking too long. A UKIP government would end the outsourcing of recruitment. Capita, an outsourcing company which has run army recruitment since 2012, is paid around £44 million a year for a 10-year contract. £500 million. And yet in that time, recruitment has become an ever greater problem. We will hand the recruitment function back to the armed forces themselves, as has always been the case in the past. And what about defence expenditure? In terms of gross domestic product, UK defence spending was 2.85% of GDP in 2000. But since the Conservative government, came to power, defence expenditure has been in steady decline, breaking below 2.4% of GDP for the first time in 2016. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, Commander of the United States Army in Europe, has recently stated that the UK would be unable to keep up its international commitments if its forces are cut any further. Lord Dannett, former Chief of the Defence Staff, has said that General Hodges' remarks are timely and well-founded. Other senior military commanders have been constantly warning the Conservative government that their cuts are seriously harming our military capability. And I, as a former military commander and as a former chief planner for the EU's Common Security and Defence Policy, echo their concerns. The UK, in military terms, is significantly weaker in both strength and capabilities compared to other states than it was 10 or 15 years ago. In order to find internal savings to keep things going, the Ministry of Defence is continuing to sell off its assets. It is now intending to sell 30% of its built-on land, barracks and so forth, whilst this release of MOD land does give the opportunity for the construction of up to 55,000 new homes, it will make any future enlargement of the armed forces difficult and expensive, as there will be no barrack accommodation to accommodate the increase in personnel. And these things can only be sold once. In addition, because the MOD has failed to fully apply the Treasury's rules in expenditure and procurement, the Treasury has imposed a fine on the MOD of £31.6 million. That's like a bank charging you for the cost of a letter to tell you that you're overdrawn. The Army now has approximately 78,000 soldiers, down from 102,502 in 2010. Main battle tank strength has been cut by 40%, and Britain now has fewer main battle tanks than neutral Switzerland. And there has been a 35% cut in self-propelled artillery. Together, the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy have suffered more than 10,000 job losses. The Ministry of Defence is now planning to sell HMS Ocean, HMS Albion and HMS Bulwark, thereby ending the UK's ability to conduct amphibious landings. They are also planning to cut around 1,000 Royal Marines, that is 1/6 of the entire Royal Marine force. Now there are those, maybe in this room, maybe watching us now, that will argue that in the modern world we do not require such large armed forces. So let's look at that for a moment. The conflict in eastern Ukraine has been characterised not only by the use of lightly armed irregular forces, but also by the use of sophisticated multi-launch rocket systems and main battle tanks. In many respects, it is an example of conventional war at its most vicious and its most heavy. I know, I was there for 4 to 5 months. Signals intelligence and jamming, along with cyber warfare, have been employed alongside those conventional capabilities constantly. The simple fact is that British Armed Forces may be called upon at any time to fight in such a scenario. It is an uncomfortable truth for the British government that not all wars are fought like Afghanistan. I myself have served in the regular and the territorial army as a tank soldier, an infantry officer and an intelligence officer for nearly 20 years. I've spent the subsequent 20 years after leaving in places such as Kosovo, Macedonia and Helmand alongside my military colleagues. Since I joined the army in 1979, I've seen a massive, and I mean massive, downgrading of our military capabilities compared to those of other states. Cuts in training have demoralised our armed forces and reduced their warfighting capability. Reductions in full spectrum capabilities have left the nation unprepared to face present, let alone emerging threats. In the context of Brexit, these reductions must be of the gravest concern. UKIP would phase in increased defence spending during its first 5 years in power. Come back to that point shortly. And up to an additional $5 billion within the following 5 years. We will rebuild our armed forces and restore them to their rightful place among the world's most professional, flexible and fighting forces in the world, able to meet the security demands of the modern era and react appropriately to any threat that the UK, its friends or allies face at home or abroad, both now and in the future. In the forthcoming months, further details will emerge. Let me turn to a timely issue, that of the EU's permanent security cooperation. Now, I fully understand that the government had the opportunity, and indeed we understand was intending until the last moment, to sign up to the EU's permanent security cooperation policy. It did not. I'm thankful that that's the case, but we must not be negligent. The EU's treaties contain clear ambitions for the EU's defence integration, and that of its EU member states, along with centralised command and control. These ambitions are now being openly pursued. Perhaps just because Jean-Claude Juncker's parents refused to buy him a train set, that does not mean that we should provide him with one now. Now, let's be entirely clear. The EU's common security and defence plans are associated with eventual formation of a European federal state. And any involvement in the EU's permanent security cooperation by the UK would place the UK at a significant risk of compromising the integrity and capabilities of the British Armed Forces and of subordinating them to EU authority. In particular, the EU's ambitions are a threat to the UK's status as the only European member of the Five Eyes intelligence community. They pose a threat to NATO cohesion through creating duplication, dividing assets, and through political competition between the European Union and the alliance itself. They will interfere with the way that national armed forces are administered, and, for example, are likely to enforce the wider introduction of trade unions within armed forces. They will result in a significantly negative impact on the UK's defence industry and procurement. For example, in future tenders for major defence procurement that maybe for national security interests we would want to be given at home will have to be tendered across the entire European Union. Our tanks and warships may be built in Poland of Chinese steel. Decisions affecting UK defence priorities will end up being made in the European Union, in Brussels. This all despite the fact that even technically we will have left the European Union. Let me dwell for a moment on greater EU military integration being a threat to NATO. The propaganda, and that's what it is, pumped out by Brussels is entirely misleading. It is also delusional. The European Union is not the reason that Europe has been peaceful for the past 72 years. NATO, and the fact that member states of that alliance have until recently maintained formidable military capabilities working under the framework of the NATO alliance, is the reason that we in Europe have avoided major conflict. I served as a tank soldier and on the staff of the 1st British Corps in Germany in the 1980s, during the Cold War. There is no question. It was NATO that was then, and NATO that remains, the military alliance that has deterred external aggression and prevented war in Europe. The European Union was nowhere to be seen in that context. And I find it absolutely staggering that EU officials now claim that it was the European Union that kept the peace. The only reason EU officials are able to spread their propaganda, and for it to take traction, is that nobody under the age of around 40 now has any recollection of the Cold War. The likes of Jean-Claude Juncker are exploiting that opportunity. And indeed, it could even be argued that the European Union, through its ineptitude, has exacerbated, if not created, conflicts and the drivers of conflict. For example, in Ukraine. Countries that are members of the NATO alliance and the European Union will, if they pledge to participate in PESCO, inevitably pledge assets to the European Union. And indeed, that is the whole purpose of PESCO. Yet they will not, I am sure, increase their resources. The inevitable result will be that resources will be split between NATO and European Union military commitments. Not only that, but the European Union will have a significant degree of political and regulatory control over EU member states' defence and industrial policy. The inevitable result of that is that EU member states will all have to agree in some way any support that they provide to the NATO alliance, making the entire construct slow when, if conflict or crisis threatens, a timely and decisive result will be critical. Now, I know that many of you will be saying, okay, but why is he going on about all this when the UK did not sign up to PESCO? When it could have done on Monday, but it didn't. Surely all this is academic. No, it is not. The risk of the government selling our armed forces down the river or risking our armed forces being deployed on EU political control, and of the EU having to apply more draconian EU Commission regulations on procurement are as real as they were before Monday. I return to my earlier point. The EU treaties contain clear ambitions for EU defence integration and centralised command and control. These ambitions are still being pursued. The UK government has stated clearly that future integration with European security and defence structures is on the cards. Theresa May has stated that the UK is offering to subordinate elements of its military and foreign policies to those of the European Union as part of the Brexit negotiations, and to dedicate part of our foreign aid budget, which UKIP believes needs to be massively cut, to the European Union. In addition, the government paper on this topic, released in September this year, says at paragraph 75, and I quote, "As part of the deep and special relationship, the United Kingdom wants to explore how best to ensure that the United Kingdom and European defence and security industries can continue to work together to deliver the capabilities that we need. This could include future UK collaboration in the European Defence Agency. We would consider options and models for participation in the Commission's European Defence Fund, including both the European Defence Research Programme and the European Defence Industrial Development Programme. Our future partnership would mean European capabilities could be developed in support of our joint security and shared values." Now that all sounds very good, doesn't it? Common sense. Until you see that all of those structures recently created involve UK authority being delegated to the collective decision-making processes of the European Union, plus, for various reasons, Norway. Delegated authority. If we are delegating authority over our defence policy to the European Union, are we not handing over our own independent defence policy? Of course we are. The question is, does the British public want its armed forces and defence industry to be regulated and politically controlled, or are soldiers, sailors and airmen sent into harm's way by people that they cannot even vote out of office? Or do they want the British government and British Parliament to have unfettered authority to make such decisions? UKIP believes firmly. UKIP is fighting and will continue to fight to ensure that the government does not allow our armed forces and the defence budget and our cutting-edge military science, research and industry to become institutionally entangled with those of the European Union. To do so would be to compromise our own ability to defend ourselves, and to do so would be to compromise our national ability to ensure that this country is confident, prosperous and secure in the years beyond Brexit. Now that said, this part that the UK must never, never lose independent sovereign control over its defence policy, military procurement or deployment of its armed forces.
Yeah.
If I need to be any clearer, I will be unambiguously clear. UKIP opposes any subordination to EU policies in the area of defence and security. UKIP will passionately oppose any threat to the cohesion, unity and capabilities of the NATO alliance as the result of any EU effort to develop its own military defence capabilities. And UKIP will seek to cooperate with all its friends and allies abroad, including member states of the European Union. Now, I have focused on the military, but I want to turn briefly to policing and borders. The aim of UKIP is to ensure that we are secure at home, at our borders, as well as abroad. The police are obviously the primary agency responsible for security at home. Yet, in addition to compromising our armed forces, the Conservative government has presided over swingeing cuts to our police. The government has persistently argued that cuts to policing do not affect the front line. Yet we have seen a rapid and increasingly concerning increase in recorded crime across most areas. With the gradual demise of specialist road traffic units, deaths and serious injuries on our roads are also significantly on the up. The cuts to policing have not yet ended. The Metropolitan Police, for example, despite the heightened threat from jihadi terrorism on the streets of London, is having to find another £400 million of savings. There is no question the Conservative government policies are compromising the enforcement of the rule of law, and we are all, despite the outstanding efforts of our police officers and staff across the country, less secure because of those policies. UKIP would put an immediate stop to policing and indeed fire service cuts and would gradually reverse them. Our aim would be to recruit a further 20,000 police officers and to enhance our intelligence services, as well as separating out again the intelligence services budget from that of the armed forces. On borders, the border force budget has also been massively reduced over recent years. The border force budget in the year 2012-13 was £617 million. In 2016-17, that had been reduced to £558 million. That's a reduction of £69 million in 4 years. Mrs May, when recently asked in the House of Commons about border force cuts, stated, "I can assure my right honourable friend that we are maintaining the capabilities he talked about, but we are delivering them in a different way." You certainly are. He and I have discussed a particular contract that is no longer in place. What Border Force has done is look to see how it can work in a variety of ways to provide that capability, including, obviously, by working with the Royal Navy. Teresa, is that the same Royal Navy that can't put some of its major units to sea for want of sailors, supplies and fuel? The Select Committee on Borders report released today makes it very clear that the government has simply been keeping its fingers crossed in regards of Brexit and the related impact on our borders. It makes plain that if the government does not immediately commence planning and preparation, we risk chaos on our borders the day after we leave the customs. The danger of Brexit, therefore, in this area, is not in leaving the European Union. It is in the government neglecting in its duty to plan and prepare for the decent and secure management of our nation's borders. I have myself long called for a fully funded and comprehensive multi-agency air, land and sea national border strategy. But the government seems not to do strategies, and it doesn't have one. Even Albania has one. The urgent development of such a fully funded strategy is a UKIP policy. UKIP would also immediately reverse cuts to Border Force, and I call on Philip Hammond in his budget presentation in a few days to do exactly that. UKIP would also immediately commence the recruitment of a further 4,000 Border Force staff, and our unemployed veterans would be a good place to start with that recruitment drive. Ladies and gentlemen, in this speech I have referred to a UKIP government. For many this may seem a lofty ambition. However, it is only by presenting practical and achievable solutions to real challenges rather than burying our heads in the sand, and by presenting credible policies that we will achieve the influence to make these things happen. And that is what I have done today. Outline realistic and necessary policies. UKIP is the only party that is 100% supportive of our armed forces and our emergency services. The only party that is pledging to reverse real cuts to our military, police and border force. The only party pledging to look after our veterans. We are the only party that is 100% committed to preventing the subordination of our defence policy to the European Union in any way. UKIP today pledges to save our services and to protect our protectors through Brexit and beyond. Thank you very much.